So once again, I want to say good afternoon and thank you all for joining us today for our conversation about other protected populations, protections within civil rights and Title IX. I want to thank ACTE for this wonderful opportunity and this opportunity to have this conversation today, because so much has changed over the last several years. And we know there's a renewed dialogue around scaling innovations around schools and districts, right? This includes continuing to strengthen CTE pathways and developing new courses and opportunities, which really excites me personally as a child of CTE. We're beginning to really understand that this is not an alternative. This is just another way, right? And so as CTE programs grow and more students experience those pathways and courses, what's really, really key is that we make sure those learning experiences are inclusive and accessible for everyone, And so we're looking forward to engaging in a dialogue around some strategies for ensuring all students are successful in their CTE experiences and beyond. And perhaps we'll pick up a little extra information, have some confirmation and some affirmation along the way. Now, before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things we need to take care of for today's conversation. We are recording this session, and so people can access this recording and others through ACTE's website, which is acteonline.org/webinars. Once again, acteonline.org/webinars. We also want to include your questions in this conversation. This is not just about me talking. This is about you having your voice heard with these fantastic guests I have today. So we'll be monitoring our chat to add your questions to the conversation as best as possible. So please feel free to type them in, your comments, your thoughts, all of that is going to be saved. And because we have a jam-packed panel and a limited amount of time, any unanswered questions that are found in the chat, if you're so kind to leave your email addresses with your comment or your question, we will be sure to respond to it after the fact. I'll reach back out to any of my panelists and get their take on it and then forward that information on to you. We try to provide the best customer service we can here. So with all of those logistics out of the way, let's get into our conversation today with our thought leaders centered around CTE and protected populations. I'd like to introduce to you first Dr. Bobby Hayes Goodrum, who has 25 years of experience as an educator and has worked as a teacher, special education supervisor, director of special education. She's been a principal. She's been the assistant superintendent of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she currently works as the superintendent of Ferndale Public Schools. I think she's done just about everything you could do in a school district. Bobby has worked in a variety of school districts throughout the United States, including Washington, D.C.'s public schools, San Jose's Unified School District, Howell Public Schools, Detroit Public Schools Community District, and Farmington Public Schools. Dr. Goodrum's primary focus is on increasing educational outcomes for all students and reducing opportunity gaps and barriers to student success. Thank you, Dr. Goodrum, for joining us today. Justin Chen, he is the director of high school connections at Lane Community College. Justin is the son of Chinese immigrants who settled, in rural Western Oregon back in 1971 and honors his family's sacrifices in his work in K-16 education. Justin's background as a first-generation college graduate has influenced his focus on literacy, post-secondary access, workforce development, and career and technical education in his broad-ranging career in rural, frontier fringe, and urban centers in Oregon. Justin serves as the acting president for the Oregon Career Development Association, vice chair for Oregon Humanities, and serves on multiple state and regional dual credit steering committees. He is also heavily invested in elevating Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders in career and college success. Justin also, add one more feather to his cap, has completed a 15-month fellowship with Advanced CTE as a post-secondary state CTE leader. Justin Chen, welcome and thank you for being here. Carlos Lopez most recently completed the inaugural cohort of post-secondary state career technical education leaders, and that fellowship as well with Advanced CTE, sponsored by ECMC Foundation. Justin, in full transparency, Justin, Carlos, and myself, we were all a part of that cohort, and that's where I had the pleasure to meet these fine persons. He has over a decade of experience as an instructor, program coordinator, academic advisor, and associate dean at secondary and post-secondary institutions focused on historically marginalized learners, and currently serves as a senior consultant and post-secondary workforce readiness specialist at the Colorado Department of Education. They earned a bachelor's degree in psychology from Metropolitan State University of Denver and a master's degree in liberal arts education leadership and policy studies, higher education from the St. John's College, Santa Fe, and University of Texas, San Antonio, respectfully. Carlos Lopez, thank you so much for being here with us today. And finally, last but certainly not least, is Luis Perez, who is a technical assistant specialist at CAST. He holds a doctorate in special education, a master's degree in instructional technology from the University of South Florida. Luis was recognized with an International Society for Technology in Education Making It Happen Award in 2020. He has published 3 books on accessibility, mobile learning, and UDL, or Universal Design Learning, Mobile Learning for All, Corn Press, Dive into UDL, and Learning on the Go. He currently serves as an education and learning strand advisor for the Assistive Technology Industry Association. Luis Perez and my colleague at CAST, thank you and welcome to this panel. As you can see, we have some heavy hitters here today, so let's get into this. Very briefly, I really want to ask this question so that people just get some context about you individually, and we'll start this with Dr. Goodrum. What brought you to this conversation, to this work, specifically around protected populations, diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Honestly, my birth, I guess, that's and many people can relate to that, but just by virtue of my personal experiences, I mean, you read, you know, my bio, and the fact is that with all of those accomplishments, I'm one of 3 children, and I'm the only one who graduated from high school. I have 2 brothers, neither of whom graduated from high school, and a lot of that had to do with the difference in the way that they were treated throughout their educational careers, and the difference that I was. So that is what really prompted me to initially get into education, period, and to work specifically in the JEDI field. So looking at justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. As far as multiple pathways, really just being in the K-12 system and understanding that the boxes that we have created, like even when you look at, we're in Michigan, so the Michigan Merit curriculum are really set up for assuming that everyone is going to go to college and have a liberal arts education, which is just very, very unrealistic. So it's not even that it only applies to people who are going to college, but it's only a specific type of education that it really supports. And it does not really, our current educational system does not really honor the type of innovation, the speed of change at which our world is evolving in a way to make sure that our students have those skills. I'm sorry, that's a hard question to start with because, you know, I apologize for the time.
I know it's a dangerous question for all of you because I know the passion that you all bring to your work. So we're going to give it a shot with Justin. What brings you to this work, Justin?
Thank you, Dr. Goodrum, for that intro and that dive into it. So I'm navigating some feels here in a good way and also in a way that's going to make me super vulnerable here. What leads me to K-16 education plus? My parents are Chinese immigrants. My dad is a 3rd grade dropout. My mom is a 6th grade dropout, functionally illiterate in 2 languages. When I think about my dad's story to learn English, it was working at different family members' restaurants, and like it seems like a page out of like the narrative of Frederick Douglass, where it was like, write a word down, read this to me, back and forth that way, just piecemealing together language where this reality is built that way. I think about what flew me to Dr. Goodrum, you call it Jedi work. I'll echo that. Jedi work is just really looking at how does K-12, K-16 education work? Who does it put into roles of privilege? Who does it empower? On whose backs does it ride? And so I think about those pieces that way. I think about 13 years as a high school English writing instructor, where first half of the day, all the AP students, it was literally add water, let them incubate, do their thing. They're going off to Stanford. They really don't need me. Second half of the day, sheltered English, heavy IEP load, all those pieces that way, where it's like, you know, towards the end of those 13 years in K-12, it's like, it was those sheltered English students, it was those students from marginalized backgrounds that really made my day. They were the ones whose work I needed to carry forward. And so I think about those pieces that way that drive me into Jedi work. I think about in the world of CTE, what are those historical systemic triggers and foundations that bar folks from different CTE programs? Those are the things that I think about, and those are the things that drive me. I'm going to shut up and hand it over to Carlos.
Carlos, please, what brings you to this work?
The money, the power, and the fame. Am I the only one that didn't get that memo? I thought it was about the money, the power, and the fame. No, I echo a lot of what's already been said. Like Dr. Goodrum said, I was the product of that kid that was supposed to go to college to get a liberal arts education. And I did that, but I didn't necessarily find fulfillment. I always had an educator's heart. I always wanted to be in education in some way, some facet, some form. But at the same time, I come from a rural area and not everyone got that education. My sister barely graduated high school. And in talking with my brother as he was navigating college, because he knew Carlos, he knew I went to college, so he had to follow in those steps. His experience was very different because he wasn't interested in liberal arts or any of those soft programs, right? And it really got me thinking, as I carve away in a career in higher education and in education in general, how do I diversify education to where it really is inclusive and encompassing for everyone? We hear today how a lot of people want to dismantle education. They want to dismantle four-year. They want to dismantle the German system. I don't. I want to make it more inclusive. I want to expand it. I want to bring CTE, bring workforce connections into the fray so that we are building something as a nation. So we are building an economy. So we are building a knowledge task force of the next generations. And the farther that I get into education, the more I know that this work is needed. Diversity, inclusion work is needed. And I'm tired of people having experiences like I did coming through, where people look at me and go, I know you're something, I just don't know what you are. So how do we create spaces where people are coming into the locations, coming into the fray, coming into education, and getting a great experience as they're getting great knowledge? And I think that's the fundamental issue for me and why I come to this work.
Luis, can you share?
Absolutely. So for me, Dr. Goodrum, it wasn't my birth that brought me to this work. It's my experiences. So at the age of 11, I was transported from one country, from one culture, from one language to another overnight. I landed in New York City, and I had to adjust to life, going from a rural environment in the Dominican Republic to the bright lights of New York City and learning English at a young age. And so that was in some ways a traumatic experience, but also a very enriching one. It's one that's made me who I am, to be vulnerable. And then just when I thought I had figured out education, I was diagnosed with a visual impairment. And I have significant vision loss. And so I had to once again adjust to living with visual impairment. All of those experiences make me who I am, and they've made me a really adaptable person. So I always look at the assets that my experiences have provided. And for me, one of the things that brings me to this work specifically is I've realized in my family that there have been multiple pathways that you can follow to success. So I am the only one that has gone to a four-year college. Most of my cousins, my brother, they're all union electricians. And they have the advantage of not only having really good jobs, but having no student loans. So that's one of the things I've realized from all the experiences in my family. There's different ways to do this. What I've also realized is that our educational system tries to emphasize the boxes, right? It tries to put us into little boxes. And what I'm not is not a box. I'm more of a Venn diagram. And the richness of my experiences really come forth when you look at the intersection of all the things that I am. Immigrant, person of color, English learner, person with a disability or disabled person. So that's what I try to bring to my work, is helping to bring forth and celebrate those intersections of our identities.
My goodness, I think after hearing each one of your stories, we could probably end the webinar right here, because it specifically lays out why we need to take a strong and heavy look at protected populations, and specifically those that are not protected, but certainly need to be protected, lifted up, and advanced in any way possible. And I think what we also want to consider too is the level of personal connect we all have to this work, and the level of and I think that's reflective of pretty much everybody who's in our audience, who is listening, and hopefully participating by putting any questions they have into the chat. I'll take a look at that in just a second. But that's what this work is all about. Not to get on the soapbox here, but it's what education is supposed to be about: a personal connection, personal growth, personal opportunities to be had as you walk that journey. So that having been said, for those who might need a little bit of a refresher, let's talk about who these special populations are that are currently protected under Perkins 5, federal funding for CTE programs. So those are individuals with disabilities, or as I like to try and pronounce more correctly, disabilities, individuals from economically disadvantaged families, including low-income youth and adults, individuals preparing for non-traditional fields, single parents, including single pregnant women, out of workforce individuals, homeless individuals, youth who are in or have aged out of the foster care system, youth who with a parent who is a member of the armed forces and who is on active duty, individuals with other barriers to educational achievement, including individuals with limited English proficiency. And it's that last one here that I almost really want to take a look at. But what you don't hear are people of color. What you don't hear are members of the LGBTQ plus community, specifically those two groups. And I find that odd, because in most other areas we talk about those are groups that need to be protected and need to be lifted up. And so while no one is disregarding the need for these other populations to be protected, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of intersectionality, okay? Where, and Louise, I think you laid it out so beautifully. So I think I want to start this with you, the concept of intersectionality, and the fact that we can't just look at those different populations and not recognize that there are other experiences that impact those populations that are brought on specifically by the fact that they are members of different races, or they're members of the LGBTQ plus population. So how do you think intersectionality fits into the need to protect those other populations that aren't listed here?
Well, like I said, we are much more complex, right? And at CAS, we really look at it from the perspective of universal design for learning, and the idea that there is that variability in every environment, whether people have been diagnosed with something or they're receiving services under some sort of legal mandate. Everybody brings that variability to the classroom. And so one of the key things about universal design for learning is anticipating that variability and designing for it by creating flexible learning environments. And it may be that somebody brings an experience that they may not be ready to share yet. They may be still coming to terms with it. That was the case for me with my disability. I was comfortable talking about race. I was comfortable talking about my immigrant experience. I wasn't so comfortable talking about my disability. That took time. And so we need to create environments where not only are we providing flexible opportunities for learning, but we're creating welcoming learning environments where people feel they belong, where they feel they see themselves in the curriculum, right? So we want to create, windows and mirrors, so that you can see yourself, but you can see beyond where you are in the learning. So I think it's just not as easy. Like, we're just much more like that, like I said earlier, than just, a collection of different identities. It's really the intersection of them that really makes us who we are, and that lived experience too. What we've lived through, we have a lot of knowledge that sometimes we don't recognize. Everything that we've gone through in life is for a reason. That's knowledge. And that's something that we can bring to learning. So I think that's why it's important to include these other populations, because knowing about our history, and it is Black History Month, by the way, so we want to acknowledge and recognize that. Knowing about those histories is going to make us better. It's going to make us more knowledgeable about the world that we live in. So I think it's important to bring all of those perspectives in.
Dr. Goodrum, I want to throw this concept at you as well, especially from a 50,000-foot level as superintendent of Ferndale Public Schools, and the one who authored and led the equity audit for Farmington Public Schools as well. Can you talk about the need for being that inclusive in your thinking when it comes to the concept of intersectionality in designing your classroom and thinking about your curriculum and thinking about outcomes for students? And I know CTE rooms or programs have certain characteristics that might be different or are different from that regular classroom, but at the same time, though, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, the thinking is still there to be inclusive in that level of thinking. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. And as Dr. Perez talked about, when you look at inclusivity, it really is about being flexible. What it isn't about, and that's really where intersectionality comes in. It isn't about, I am Black, and so this is how I learn. This person is of Asian descent, and this is how they learn. This is what they're going to like. This person is, this person has a non-disclosed disability. They have some kind of neural atypicality. This is how they learn. Intersectionality is really the fact that we are each like a combination of so many things. The only way that you can reach us as individuals is to get to know us as individuals with all of those experiences, and not what I've always had trouble with the term cultural competence, because people feel like that means that you know everything about a certain culture. And always to me, it meant I don't know anything about you as an individual until I get to know you. You could be a Black woman who's 45 years old and a superintendent, and we could be two very different people. It doesn't matter. So to me, the whole thing about intersectionality, it just gives more truth to life about the fact that you can't make assumptions about people. So as an instructor and as someone who is designing a class and wanted to make everybody feel welcome, it is really about creating Mr. Walker, I don't like to say there's no such thing as a safe space, as giving people that option, that opportunity to understand that this is a brave space and we're going to be brave together. We're going to share ourselves together. We're going to understand that I cannot say that everyone in this place is going to always feel comfortable. I cannot say that everything in here is going to be sacred, and I'm going to ask that it is, but we can't guarantee that. But we still have to encourage our students to be themselves and to share themselves, and as instructors kind of build that community in a way that allows everyone to be an individual and then still be a part of a community of learners and all make progress. I hope I answered the question, because I got started talking and I couldn't remember which.
As usual, Dr. Goodrum, you hit it out of the park without a doubt. And very quickly, Ms. Clark from Chicago Public Schools had never heard the term Jedi work and loves the acronym. And anytime I can get a Star Wars blast out of this, I'm always going to give a thumbs up to that. So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Goodrum. Justin and Carlos, I want to bring this one to you as well. Both of you have worked and do work as a part of the larger system with moving students from secondary to post-secondary and making those connections. Can you speak to how intersectionality can impact the efficiency of that move, or what hindrances you find in that? And Justin, I'll start with you, and then Carlos will take it to you.
Ooh, this is such a good question here. One of the things that I think about here, so I every year I reread the work of W.E. Du Bois around this time, and like really digging into like this idea of the double consciousness. And so when I think about our students of color, our intersectional students across the board, I think about some of those narratives that we have where for so many of our students who are first to post-secondary, or you know, this whole concept of like college going culture is so weird and bizarre to me, where it's like, are we just thinking about four-year liberal arts? Are we thinking of two-year community college, you know, so on and so forth? I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but I think about that idea of that double consciousness, where for so many of our students in special populations, they are A, B, C, and D at home. But when they go into the classroom, there's a different set of expectations. There's a different set of realities where, for me, as an Asian American man, cisgendered, somewhat able-bodied at my age, there are those realities that I am navigating in certain spaces where this is who I am. But then at 5:01 when I get home, I'm a different person. At 12:01 p.m. in front of my parents, my mom, I'm a different person. And so I think about all of those pieces, not just, and I'm looking at the comment here, not just code switching, but like having that absolute, just that abrupt shift, where, you know, it's navigating those dual identities in the same space. Looking at, you know, in my community, I'll speak to this here. If I were to have told my parents in 1995, 1996, as I was getting ready to graduate high school, that I was going to go to a community college and get an AAS in welding or mechatronics, that would have probably been the end all of things for my parents, where, you know, in their mind, we did not immigrate to this country for you to work with your hands, because in their minds, a career technical ed program was dirty. It was manual labor. Those were things that they had experienced. And those were the things that they were trying to leave behind as we're coming across, you know, an ocean, where it's like, we're gonna populate, and I see that Brandy Clark's here from Oregon Department of Ed, so I won't slam Oregon too much here. Some really, really rural and hostile communities, where it's like Roseburg, Oregon. It's where my parents first started out, you know, in no other place. When, you know, as a 16-year-old boy, as my dad came out here, where it's like, go home, fill in the blank, you know. And I know that those things still exist here, where it's like those pieces that way, where it's like, why do you want to do that? And so I think about that sense of double consciousness. I think about that piece of like really pushing back against those internalized systems of racism that so many folks of color carry with them. So many of those feelings of colonization that they carry with them. So how do we push back against those pieces that way? And so when I think about this topic here, and I need to give some space for Carlos, give a lot of space for Carlos to dive into this, the sense of intersectionality is, I think, a really important way that we need to look at JEDI work and access work for our students.
Carlos, jump in at any point and along what you've heard.
So I agree with everything that I've heard. I just want to add something. I know we wanted to talk about, you know, pragmatic discussions and things that can happen. And this whole discussion makes me think of a conversation that I had with my team of teachers while I was at a technical college. And it originated with, I believe it was Maya Angelou, the great Maya Angelou, who said, "As a phoenix, we rise," right? Sometimes when students are making that transition from high school to post-secondary institutions, they're looking to reinvent themselves. They're looking to get away from a home life. And we talked about LGBTQ folks. When you can get away from a closeted, sheltered life within your home situation because of perhaps it's not a welcoming situation to come out as LGBTQ, when you get onto a college campus, that's when you can really be yourself. That's when you can determine, I mean, manifest destiny for yourself, right? You can create who you want to be. And with my teachers, it was the question of, what are your biases? What are you bringing to the table? And what assumptions are you making of students when you see them, when you have that initial conversation with them? The things like Dr. Goodrum and Dr. Perez said, what are the things that you're not seeing of your students? And what are those biases that you were casting onto this classroom? And how do you eliminate those? It also goes in hand with exactly what Dr. Goodrum was saying and Dr. Perez. We're not boxes. And I love data. I love me some data. That's how I make my decisions, right? That's how we do what we do in education. But when you start looking at data and you see those boxes that are checked, when you start seeing the numbers that are representing, it's real easy to get into a discussion that those numbers no longer represent people. So how do you not just de-aggregate, but how do you rehumanize the data to get people to understand the practice? And I think that is where the rubber meets the road, and that's when it turns into an art form, especially in the classroom, that to be inclusive, to understand all of these intersexualities takes some radical thinking, and it takes some radical kindness to be able to accept people for who they are and how they are, and be the consummate professional to take yourself out of that, to accept the person, to give the learning environment in a way that is going to meet those people. I mean, we have this term, right, that I personally don't like, but I'll use. When you're meeting the student halfway, or when you're meeting them where they are, you definitely have to get to know who that student is before you can even take a step towards them. And you have to, I believe, in the classroom, you have to be willing to take that step towards them first, instead of always assuming that they're coming towards us. If we're the professionals, if we're the teachers, we have to figure out a way to make it relatable to them, not always expect them to sit down in our classrooms and be fully developed, fully actualized, 100% adult that has been in the world for 35 years and has had, you know, experiences and impressions to know who they are. We can't assign who they are. We have to let them develop into who they will become.
I don't know how really to follow up that kind of response with another question, but I'll do my best, because you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I think we need to get away from this thought process of education being this industrialized, widget producing kind of system, and realize that, and then this is to the respect and uplift of every single teacher who might be listening and might see this recording later on. We need to get back to respecting our teachers as the professionals and the experts that they are. And too much of this society has gotten away from that particular concept. I mean, these are highly qualified, highly educated individuals whose sole purpose, beyond infusing this individual in front of them with education, is educating themselves. I don't know how you're a teacher and you're not constantly pouring information into yourself so that you can constantly pour that information into someone else. But we don't respect our teachers anymore, or certainly not like we should. And so we need to get to that so that they can do exactly what you're talking about, Carlos. I agree with you 100%. So you all have painted this really great picture about the need for these protected populations, students of race, people of color, LGBTQ+, needing to be a part of the CTE world and what it can do for them. But we still don't have enrollment like we would want to have it. That I've been around this field now for somewhere near 10 years, And if there's one theme I keep hearing is we got to get more people of color into CTE programs. We got to get more, people of the LGBTQ plus people in the program, into these programs, or we constantly keep genderizing the program. Specifically, girls go into this program like nursing and culinary or something like that, and guys go into this program. This is a really loaded question. What are we doing wrong? And okay, I'm going to you, Dr. Goodrum. What are we doing wrong?
I really, because Justin, when he told his story and the idea of what his parents expected, or how his parents would have felt if that is the educational industrial complex has capitalized on the prestige paradigm. I know I sound like old dude off of In Living Color, but that is a real sentence that makes sense. We have a prestige paradigm where people feel like instead of dual enrollment, where you are actually getting college credit, is de-emphasized in favor of AP classes, which you actually have to pay to take the test, and then you do not get the credit unless you pass that test with a certain score. That one day you took this college level class for a whole year, but you don't get credit because the prestige is what the parents like. That is what we have been socialized to believe. In order for my child to achieve the American dream, they take AP classes or they're in the IB program, and then they go to this 4-year institution. So a big part of the barrier is really, it is really education of our families. And so when we talk about, so we have people who come out and they have CTE in the K-12 setting, we might have CTE open house, et cetera, but very rarely will those materials be in languages for everybody in that your community serves. Very rarely will you have people who are coordinating with ELL coordinators or bilingual coordinators to make sure that someone is available to speak to parents in their native language. Very rarely are we talking about the statistics of what outcomes for these AP kids versus CTE kids, because really when you look at the data, we really would be pushing so much more, except we are, again, the educational industrial complex, SAT, AP, like how it's all, I'm sorry, they own that. It is a company and they own it. Like, it sounds conspiratorial, but it's the truth. That was my part.
So, okay. So we need to have a moment of confession then, and full transparency and vulnerability. I guess I'm one of those parents too, for my youngest, pushing her, IB, AP, and everything else. And so now you have me ready at the conclusion of this webinar to go upstairs and apologize to my child for being that parent. So I'll work on that particular part, but I hear what you're saying loud and clear, Dr. Goodrum, and I agree with you 100%. Louise.
No, I completely agree with that. But also, if the methods by which we bring people into these fields are not working, let's think about other things. I know this from a friend of mine who works in public health, and whenever they need to do a public health campaign in some of our communities, guess where they go? They go to the barbershop. That's where people gather. That's where news about the community is shared. So let's think about different places where we can go, community organizations, the barbershop, whatever it may be, where people gather in our communities and share these stories of people who have made it in a variety of different ways, and not always in a straight line, right? Because our lives don't always follow a straight line. You may start in one place and then end up in a different place. I studied to be a foreign service officer, and yet here I am as an accessibility professional. So all kinds of things can happen in your life, and they're all valid. They're just different pathways. That's what we need to emphasize.
I think you bring up a really great point, Louise. And Carlos, I saw your hand up, so I'm going to come to you next. But I think you bring up a really great point, especially for our K through 12 schools. But maybe it's a perspective, and I know part of this discussion in the time that we have remaining is to try and bring some sort of strategies that people can take back with them to their work and see how they can move the needle on their work in a positive way. But part of what I wanted to lift up is the fact that getting into those communities means schools need to be in communities, and schools need to be of communities, and communities need to put their arms around the schools, and the schools need to put their arms around the communities. And that even goes for, I think, our post-secondary institutions. You know what I mean? Community colleges, even though you may not obviously be located in a neighborhood, you have neighborhoods that you can put your arms around. You can go into those schools and make yourselves more apparent and available and accessible through working with your schools. And then that allows you to have those connects that you're talking about, and learn that the local barbershop is where all the, how do they say, where all the tea is spilled. You know what I mean? So that's where you want to, that's what you want to do. Carlos, please jump in.
Can we also look at leadership?
Absolutely.
Representation matters. And how are we developing leaders that have and can express those stories that Dr. Goodrum was talking about, and Dr. Perez and Justin are talking about? What are we doing? What are we doing wrong? Well, essentially, the way I see it, what we're doing wrong is we are perpetuating and sustaining an institution that worked for one subset of people and against many other subsets of people. And I know it's dangerous to start talking like this because we all love CTE, and I can get brandished as being woke and being anti-CTE, but we honestly and truly need to look at CTE in post-secondary, and we need to understand, is it a white space? How do we need to deconstruct the white spaceness of it? And how do we need to promote other stories within our space? And you do that through data. Colorado is doing a gap analysis to understand what students are doing, what, where, how they're being successful, how they're not, which demographics are doing great and which aren't doing great. And then the next step is to start digging in to see, why are some places successful? Are they in communities? Are they perpetuating communities? Is representation of the teachers, of the leadership there? How? We know, I know, and I love Colorado, but our ledge is a very white space. I mean, just like politics, there's a lot of dominant cultures that get elected to positions of power in politics. How do we inform those people that they have or are missing certain stories to understand how policy and law can affect what we have to do in the classroom, in the areas, in the districts? At certain, and I don't want to, I can go off forever about this, especially when we're looking at policy and we're looking at power. But I think what we need to do is we need to look internally as an organization, whatever organization that is, that's doing CTE workforce education, and understand, how do you start tweaking it so it is more inclusive? How has it traditionally only helped one subset, and how do we break that apart for good, for good reason? I'll stop there. I think you know where I'm getting to, Donald, but I'll stop there.
No, I think you're speaking truth to power in my opinion. And I think one of the things we need to consider as a society, and certainly in the work that we're doing, is that as a society, we tend to have a very singular focus when we think about things. We're not binary in any way, shape, or form. We don't want to hold a both and. It's always got to be an either or. And that takes us right back to the concept of intersectionality. We need to be able to handle a both and kind of thinking. And to your point, that if we were to de-emphasize spaces that were predominantly or are predominantly white, we need to get away from the thought of de-emphasizing doesn't mean I'm taking away from you, or that you're going to lose something. You're just making more space and room for these other folk who are sitting in a room looking to get the same thing that other group is already receiving. So was that share and share alike? I think that's that old concept we all ran into as children. Justin, I'd like for you to speak to this that as well, if you have any thoughts around it. And but also we typically, and I want to be very open about this, and at least in my opinion, when we start talking about people of color, we specifically land on Latinx or African American. But your work and in your intro, you place a whole lot of emphasis on Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander as well. Are there any challenges specific to those groups because they're not often looked at in this minority or marginalized pool in the same way LGBTQ plus and Latinx and African Americans are looked at. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Donald. So in the county that I live in, just did a labor market analysis where just some real general data as far as how data is collected on wage earning, education levels. Lane County, Oregon, much like all the state of Oregon, much like the United States, we buy into like this sense of like within the AANHPI diaspora, this model minority myth where if we're looking at Lane County, Oregon, right now, the average monthly earning for any 25-year and up Asian, which doesn't disaggregate data of, you know, recent immigrant, refugee, yada, 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 $5,000 a month. $5,000 a month is about 5 to 8% more than any other racial demographic in Oregon, but that, or in Lane County. But then the thing that they also break out here, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders are making $1,200 less than any other racial ethnic group in Lane County, period. And so when we look at data here, yes, when we look at that wide lump of Asian American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, to the dominant culture, they're doing okay. They don't need special attention. They don't need, there is no inequities happening here in education or economic vitality. But as we disaggregate data, what is really happening here? And so when I think about the work that has to be done, and I'll be brief on this here, one of the things that we're looking at in my department here at Lane Community College is we're trying to close that access gap for CTE. And so the thing that we're pushing forward with is a regional technical early college course that is led by our multicultural center and our faculty members there, partnering with Migrant Ed, with the ESD, partnering with African American Black Student Success at the ESD, partnering with Native programs here within the county and across the state. And so we're targeting 3 sectors here: allied health, education, business CIT. And so when we focus on those things, this fits into, and Dr. Goodrum, I think you nailed it on the head, is that prestige piece. So for our immigrant parents, our folks who see 4-year degree as your ticket to ride, this puts CTE in a different conversation where CTE is pre-STEM, CTE is pre-transfer. Allied health leads you into different high-paying, not high-paying, family wage positions. Education, across the board for so many traditional cultures, this is an underpaid career path, but very valued. Business CIT, there's that part. And I think about so many folks of color during the pandemic. You want to look at where the most economic growth was. It was in small businesses led by women of color, period. And that is entrepreneurship, that is grit, that is gusto, and that is folks navigating a system that doesn't give them a foothold, period.
So we have roughly 7 minutes left. And so I'm going to challenge you that in these next 7 minutes, we're going to fix the world and we're going to fix the system. Okay, this is the challenge that I'm putting forth to you. So in this time, and I know this will be difficult to do, can you offer, and I'm just gonna, if you'll popcorn it to the next person, if you will, can you give us, for those who are listening, as concrete as possible, a strategy that they can take away with today that they can use to help be more inclusive, to recruit better, to be more aware, to move the needle positively for these 2 specific groups that are not protected under Perkins. Dr. Goodrum, I'll start it with you, and then you just popcorn it to the next person, please.
So we have very little time. I just think so what we're doing here in my district, which is a very, very diverse district, both economically and racially, and actually with respect to gender and sexuality, like Ferndale is the hub in the state of Michigan, just as far as all people. But what we are doing is starting these conversations earlier. Like we've had discussions about 6th grade parent meetings, 7th grade parent meetings, 8th grade parent meetings. A lot of times we start talking about CTE when kids are already in high school, or their freshman year of high school, or when they're going into it. We are trying to get that information out to parents, talking about all of our pathways that we have, but also being very clear about, yes, and then you have to take this test, and then you have to score this. However, we have this, and you get these college credits right here, and you have this certification at the end of it. So really, again, emphasizing the benefits of programs, not to steer people one way or another, just to get people where they want to be based on the interest of the child. And I'm going to pop it to Justin.
That was a nice handoff there. Big ticket item, decolonize work-based learning. Big ticket item, what that means. When we are engaging young folks, so much like Dr. Goodrum talks about here, bringing CTE and work-based learning to younger students. So 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, those are key moments. This is also that in those key moments, finding professionals who are willing and able to give quality time as mentors, not just for the students, but for those parents. How do I see myself in these CTE programs? Popcorning it over to Louise.
I would say get connected. There's a lot of work to be done. You don't have to do it alone. There is a community, and this is just the start of a conversation here, but follow Justin, follow Carlos, follow Dr. Goodrum if you can find us on social media, and find each other. But also to the point that we started with here, we're living at a point in time where the people that we're talking about, it's at this time that they need the most protection, because we are under attack. And so don't shy away, because it's easy to kind of get burnt out and kind of take a step back. This is the time when we need to step up, not step back, step up for others. So that's my final thought.
Ask questions, don't make assumptions, and don't give up. I think everybody that's on this call is already a disruptor in their own way. Continue being a disruptor, but never assume that the people in front of you think the same way you do. Ask the question to find out first. Ask the question to open the conversation, because somebody may completely disagree with you, but if you don't ask the question, you don't know how to approach that conversation. And if you sit quiet and never ask the question and that person disagrees with you, if that person is a position of power, they're making the policy that is different than what you want. Always ask questions. And when power hears questions and think that you're trying to disrupt or usurp, that is the person you need to ask more questions of.
Amen. Amen. Can I say that and this and not get into trouble? I hope so, but too late now. Genie's out of the bottle. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all. And I want to say immediately that I want to invite you back to other conversations. I certainly hope you can make room in your busy schedule, as I will extend invites when given the opportunity. This has been an absolutely fabulous discussion. And I think the worst part about the discussion was the time limit. 60 minutes was never going to be enough for all of you. But I thank you for giving what you gave. I want to remind everyone who's listening right now, who's with us, to please, if you're interested in responding or connecting, please I'm going to put my email in the chat for those who would like to reach out to any of our panelists. By all means, you can contact myself or panelists if you are open to any of our guests who are tuning in right now. That's my radio background kicking up saying tuning in. By all means, put your email in the chat so that as Luis said, we can make that connection and we can form that community without a doubt. Dr. Bobby Hayes Goodrum, congratulations and best of luck, continued luck on your work in Ferndale Public Schools. They are blessed to have you. Full transparency, Dr. Goodrum and I work together in Farmington Public Schools, and so I know of her work and I know what they have, and I'm very happy that they have her. I'm sad that we no longer have her. Justin Chin, Lane Community College, thank you for your passion, your drive, your excellence, and your connectivity. Please continue to do what you do, sir, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Carlos Lopez as well, same with you in your new position. The Department of Ed, continue to be that disruptor. I know you are, and I hope it rubs off on a whole lot of other people along the way. And Luis Perez, thank you for allowing me to be your colleague in this work here at CAST for accessibility and social justice. We're all about here trying to, as CAST would say, until learning has no barriers. And we know that this is one of those barriers. So let's work all together until learning has no barriers. All right. Want to thank everybody for your time. I hope you have a great rest of the day and a pleasant weekend all. Thank you for checking us out. Take care, everyone.
Great job, Don.
Excellent, my friend Donald.